The son of a millionaire defied his family's legacy for love, but a devastating secret threatens to unravel everything they fought for. Will love survive when the darkest truths come to light? The sprawling gardens, the shimmering pool, the meticulously maintained lawns, all symbols of a legacy he was expected to inherit, a life dictated by his father, William Harrison. But Michael felt trapped, suffocating under the weight of expectations that had never truly been his own. From childhood, Michael had known the blueprint laid out for him: marry a suitable woman from a distinguished, affluent family, carry forward the Harrison name, and grow the empire. His entire existence had been carefully curated to meet these expectations. Yet his heart rebelled against the rules, drawn instead to Emma, the housemaid who had worked tirelessly in his family's mansion. Emma had a kindness and resilience that drew Michael in, a stark contrast to the cold, transactional relationships that defined his world. Emma never cared about the wealth or status that enveloped Michael's life. Her laughter was sincere, her warmth undeniable, and she had a way of making him feel truly seen, something he had never felt before. When he was with her, he could imagine a future far removed from the pressures of his family's name. A familiar set of footsteps echoed behind him, and Michael braced himself as his father entered the room. William Harrison's presence was like a storm cloud, cold and demanding, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his graying hair meticulously combed. He didn't need to speak to command the room. His authority was absolute. "Michael," William's voice sliced through the silence, "we need to discuss your future." Michael turned, already knowing the direction of this conversation. His chest tightened with frustration, but he met his father's gaze with resolve. "We've had this conversation before, Dad," he replied, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. "I'm not marrying someone just to appease the family." William's eyes narrowed. "You're not thinking straight," he said, his tone sharp. "You have responsibilities to this family, to the empire I've built. Your legacy cannot be compromised." Michael's fists clenched at his sides, a familiar anger boiling inside him. "I don't care about the empire," he shot back. "I care about Emma. I love her." The name hung in the air like a bomb, thick with tension. William's expression hardened, his face a mask of disapproval. "Emma," he spat, "that girl is beneath you. You're a Harrison, you don't throw your life away on a housemaid." Michael took a step forward, his voice rising with emotion. "She's more than that. She's everything to me. And whether you like it or not, I'm going to marry her." The room seemed to darken with William's fury. His voice lowered, cold and cutting. "If you go through with this," he declared, "I will disown you. You'll lose everything. Your inheritance, your position in the company, all of it. You'll be nothing." Michael's heart pounded, but he didn't flinch. "Then I'll be nothing," he said quietly. "But at least I'll have Emma." As he strode through the long, grand corridors of the mansion, memories flooded his mind. The endless elite parties, the insufferable business meetings he had attended since childhood, the conversations that revolved around nothing but wealth and power. None of it had ever made him feel truly alive. What mattered now was Emma. As the evening sky painted the estate in hues of purple and gold, Michael found himself standing in the small garden behind the mansion. It was a place he had often come to escape, a quiet sanctuary away from the suffocating demands of his family. Tonight, however, he was here for a different reason. With a deep breath, he pulled out his phone and dialed Emma's number. His hands trembled slightly, but he steadied himself. The line clicked and her familiar, gentle voice answered. "Michael?" Emma's voice was soft, but he could hear the concern behind it. A sense of calm washed over him at the sound of her voice. "Emma," he began, "I need to see you. There's something I have to ask you." They arranged to meet in the staff quarters, a place where Michael had spent many nights sneaking away from the world that had been forced upon him. The staff quarters were modest, but to him, they were filled with warmth and memories. It was where he could be himself, away from the expectations and burdens of the Harrison name. When he arrived, Emma was already waiting. Her eyes filled with concern and warmth, searched his face as he approached. "What's wrong?" she asked, stepping closer. Michael took her hands in his, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. "I told my father," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I asked for his blessing, he refused. He threatened to disown me if I marry you." Emma's face fell, but she held back her tears. She had always known how much Michael's family meant to him, how deeply he was entangled in the web of their legacy. Yet she also knew how much he struggled under that weight. Michael's grip on her hands tightened. "None of that matters to me," he continued, his voice growing firmer. "I love you, Emma, and I don't care what I have to give up. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Her eyes widened in shock. "Michael, are you sure?" Her voice wavered. "I don't want to be the reason you lose everything." He took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "You're not the reason I'm losing anything," he said. "You're the reason I've found everything worth living for." With that, he dropped to one knee, pulling out a small ring from his pocket. It wasn't flashy or extravagant, it was simple, elegant, and perfect. "Emma," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes, but she managed to smile, her hands flying to cover her mouth in disbelief. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely audible. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Michael stood, and Emma pulled him into a tight embrace, her tears of joy mingling with his overwhelming relief. In that moment, the world seemed to stand still. He had made his choice, and he knew, deep in his heart, that it was the right one. But as they held each other in the stillness of the garden, an unspoken fear lingered, hovering like a storm on the horizon. Michael knew his father wouldn't let this go so easily. The battle had only just begun. He was free from his father's control, at least in his heart. He had Emma, and that was all that mattered. As he dressed, his mind replayed the moment Emma had said yes, her tear-filled eyes and the relief that had swept over him. It was a memory he would carry forever, a promise that had given him the strength to face whatever lay ahead. But when he stepped into the main hall, the sense of calm was shattered. His father, William Harrison, stood at the far end, his eyes locked onto Michael with a familiar, cold intensity. The long dining table, where countless deals and decisions had been made, stretched between them like a battlefield. Michael swallowed, his hands clenching into fists as he prepared for yet another confrontation. "Sit down, Michael," William commanded, his voice low and even, yet dripping with authority. Michael hesitated for a split second before walking forward and taking a seat across from his father. The tension between them was palpable, heavy, and unyielding. The silence that followed was suffocating, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, William broke the quiet. "I heard you were with her again last night," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "Emma." Michael held his ground, his jaw tightening. "I was. I asked her to marry me," he replied, his voice steady. "And she said yes." William's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenching visibly. "You really intend to throw everything away for that girl?" he demanded, his voice growing cold. "You're willing to ruin your future over this ridiculous infatuation?" Michael's temper flared, but he forced himself to stay composed. "It's not ridiculous," he said firmly, "and it's not an infatuation. I love her." A harsh laugh escaped William's lips, one devoid of humor or warmth. "Love," he mocked. "Love is a weakness, Michael. It blinds you, makes you foolish. You're a Harrison, you don't have the luxury of being foolish." Michael shot to his feet, his anger bubbling to the surface. "No, Dad," he countered, his voice trembling with fury. "What's foolish is living your life according to someone else's rules. Your rules. I'm done being controlled by you. I'm done living a life that isn't mine." William's expression darkened, his hands curling into fists. "You're making a mistake," he warned, his voice a deadly whisper. You have no idea what you're giving up. You think love will sustain you when the money runs out? When you have nothing left but empty promises? Michael's resolve only strengthened. Maybe I don't care about the money, he said, his voice rising. Maybe I'd rather be happy than trapped in a gilded cage, living your dreams instead of mine. William rose from his seat, towering over his son. The lines of anger etched across his face were sharp, his eyes cold as ice. You don't know what happiness is, he spat. You've lived your entire life in privilege, sheltered from reality. What do you think will happen when the money runs out and you're left with nothing? Michael held his father's gaze, his heart pounding. Then I'll find out, he replied, his voice unwavering. But at least I'll be living my life, not yours. For a moment, William said nothing. The silence was thick, oppressive. Then, slowly, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You'll regret this, Michael. Mark my words. Michael didn't respond. He turned and walked out, his heart racing. He knew the storm was coming, that his father would not back down easily. But he had chosen his path and there was no turning back. The weight of his father's threats lingered in his mind, but he forced himself to shake it off. The sun was shining, and he had a life to build with Emma, free from the shadows of his family's expectations. Later that afternoon, Michael met Emma in a small, cozy cafe tucked away from the bustle of the city. It was a place they had often visited where they could escape into a world of their own, away from the gaze of the Harrisons. Emma was already seated by the window, her fingers wrapped around a warm cup of tea. Her eyes lit up as he approached, but he could see the worry still etched on her face. Michael sat down across from her, reaching for her hand. Hey, he said softly, his voice carrying a gentleness that calmed his racing heart. How's everything? Emma offered a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'm trying to stay hopeful, she admitted, her voice wavering. But I can't help thinking about your father. He won't let this go, will he? Michael's jaw tightened and he squeezed her hand. No, he said, honesty lacing his words. He won't. But it doesn't matter. We'll find a way. We're in this together. Emma's eyes searched his, filled with both love and fear. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything, she whispered. Maybe it would be better if... No, Michael interrupted, his voice firm. Don't even think that. We've come too far, Emma. I'm not losing you and I'm not letting him ruin this for us. Emma's eyes glistened with tears, but she nodded, taking a shaky breath. Okay, she said, her voice barely audible. We'll get through this. Michael leaned forward, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. I love you, he whispered, his voice full of conviction. And I'll do whatever it takes to protect what we have. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to feel the strength of his love. But in the back of her mind, the fear remained, a shadow that refused to be chased away. William Harrison was a man who thrived on control, and she knew he wouldn't rest until he got what he wanted. As they sat together, a quiet determination settled between them. They would fight for their love, no matter the cost. That evening, Michael and Emma began making plans for their wedding. They wanted something simple, intimate, far from the grandeur of the Harrison estate. A small church on the outskirts of the city seemed perfect, a sanctuary where they could exchange vows without the weight of society bearing down on them. Their friends and a few trusted members of the household staff who had always supported them would be the only guests. Emma sat at the small table in her apartment, addressing invitations by hand. Her fingers trembled slightly as she wrote, the weight of the confrontation with William still heavy on her mind. As she sealed another envelope, a knock at the door made her jump. Her heart raced as she stood, but when she opened the door, relief washed over her. Michael stood there holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, a grin spreading across his face. Thought I'd stop by and see how my fiancé is doing, he said, handing her the flowers. Emma's smile widened, and she took the bouquet, breathing in the sweet scent. "You have no idea how much I needed this," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Michael followed her inside, his eyes softening as he saw the scattered invitations and wedding notes. "You're amazing," he said, his voice full of admiration. "I know this isn't easy, but we're going to make it." Emma set the flowers down and turned to face him, her smile fading. "I just keep thinking about your father," she admitted, her voice breaking. "What if he tries something? What if he finds a way to ruin our wedding day?" Michael moved closer, taking her hands in his. "He won't ruin anything," he said firmly. "This is our day, Emma, and nothing he does will take that away from us." She looked into his eyes, searching for the reassurance she desperately needed. "Promise me," she whispered. "Promise me we'll be okay." Michael cupped her face in his hands, his gaze steady and filled with love. "I promise," he said, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "We'll get through this. Together." Despite Michael's confidence, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. William Harrison was a man used to getting what he wanted, no matter the cost. And she feared that their love would be tested in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Days passed, and the tension hanging over Michael and Emma seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. The preparations for the wedding were moving forward, but an unspoken fear lingered between them, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Michael tried to remain strong, determined to give Emma the peace she deserved, but deep down, he knew his father wasn't done with them. At the Harrison mansion, William sat in his study, staring out the window at the immaculate gardens below. His mind was a whirlwind of anger and betrayal. His son had defied him, chosen a woman he deemed unworthy, and now planned to marry her. It was a slap in the face to everything he had built, and he couldn't allow it to happen. William's assistant, Gregory, entered the room quietly, carrying a tray with a glass of whiskey. He placed it on the desk and stood back, his expression carefully neutral. "Sir," Gregory said, his voice low, "there's still time to stop this. The wedding hasn't happened yet." William didn't respond immediately. He continued to stare out the window, his fingers drumming against the polished wood of his desk. "I've tried reasoning with him," he said finally, his voice cold. "I've tried threats. But Michael is too blinded by that girl. He won't listen." Gregory shifted uncomfortably, sensing the darkness in William's tone. "What are you suggesting, sir?" William's jaw clenched, and he turned to face his assistant. "I'm not suggesting anything," he said, his eyes narrowing. "I'm stating a fact. This wedding cannot happen. If Emma is gone, this nonsense ends. Michael will have no choice but to come to his senses." Gregory's eyes widened slightly and he hesitated. "Sir, you don't mean—" William cut him off with a wave of his hand. "I mean exactly what I said. Without her, Michael has nothing. Make sure no one finds out." The room fell silent, the weight of William's words chilling the air. Gregory nodded, his expression betraying his discomfort. He had worked for William Harrison long enough to know not to question him, but the coldness in his employer's voice was unsettling. He left the room, closing the door behind him, while William leaned back in his chair, a grim smile playing at his lips. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and he would not let a simple maid ruin everything he had built. Back at Emma's apartment, the sense of foreboding hadn't lessened. Michael sat beside her on the small couch, the two of them surrounded by wedding details that no longer felt joyful. Emma had tried to put on a brave face, but the fear was ever present, a shadow neither of them could escape. Michael reached for her hand, his voice quiet. "We need to be careful," he said, his eyes filled with concern. "My father, he's dangerous when he feels cornered. I don't want anything happening to you." Emma nodded, her fingers curling around his. "I know," she whispered, her voice wavering. "But what can we do? We can't hide forever." Michael's expression hardened with determination. "We won't, but we need to be smart about this. We'll move the wedding location, make it harder for him to interfere. And I'll make sure we have people watching out for us." Emma's eyes glistened with tears, but she nodded, trusting him with every fiber of her being. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling. "We'll do whatever it takes." Michael pulled her into his arms, holding her close as he whispered words of comfort. "We're going to get through this," he promised. "No matter what he tries, we won't let him win." But even as they held each other, the darkness of William's plan loomed over them, threatening to shatter the fragile hope they had built. The storm was closer than they realized, and it would take all their strength to survive it. Only their closest friends and a handful of the Harrison household staff who had always supported them were invited. The location had been chosen for its simplicity, a place where love could flourish without the shadows of wealth or power. Emma stood in a modest dressing room at the back of the church, her hands trembling as she smoothed down the fabric of her simple white dress. It wasn't adorned with jewels or lace, but it was perfect, a testament to the life she and Michael wanted to build together, a life rooted in love, not money or status. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart, when a soft knock at the door made her turn. Sarah, one of the older housekeepers from the Harrison mansion and a dear friend to Emma, stepped inside. Her eyes lit up with warmth as she took in the sight of Emma in her wedding dress. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. Emma tried to smile, but her nerves were getting the better of her. "I'm so afraid, Sarah," she admitted, her voice shaking. "What if something goes wrong? What if he tries to stop us?" Sarah crossed the room and took Emma's hands in hers. "You and Michael have fought so hard for this," she said gently. "Don't let anyone, not even William Harrison, take this moment away from you. You deserve to be happy." Emma felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she nodded, drawing strength from Sarah's words. She knew she had to be brave, for herself and for Michael. They had come too far to give up now. Jack had been there through everything, from their carefree childhood to the tumultuous present, and he knew better than anyone how much this moment meant to Michael. "Nervous?" Jack asked, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. Michael turned to face him, a rare grin breaking through his worry. "I'm more ready than I've ever been," he said. But the smile faded quickly, and his voice grew serious. "It's my father I'm worried about. I haven't heard from him in days, and that's never a good sign." Jack's expression darkened, and he pushed off the wall. "You think he'll try something today?" Michael's jaw tightened, and he ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know. But if he does, I won't let him ruin this. I'm not letting anything come between Emma and me." Jack clapped him on the shoulder, his support unwavering. "Well, whatever happens, I've got your back. We all do." Michael nodded, grateful for his friend's loyalty. "Thanks, Jack, that means everything." This was their moment, and nothing else mattered. The minister's words were a blur to Michael, his focus solely on Emma. As they exchanged vows, the weight of the past began to lift, replaced by the promise of a future they would build together. When the minister finally said, "You may kiss the bride," Michael didn't hesitate. He pulled Emma close, his heart soaring as their lips met. The guests erupted into cheers, their joy filling the small church. But just as they turned to face their friends and family, the doors of the church creaked open. The celebration fell into a sudden, chilling silence. Standing in the doorway was William Harrison, his sharp, calculating gaze sweeping the room. The air grew heavy with tension, and a sense of dread settled over everyone present. Michael felt his heart sink, his mind racing as he tightened his grip on Emma's hand. She instinctively drew closer to him, her fear palpable. William's presence loomed like a dark cloud, threatening to destroy everything they had just promised to each other. "Michael." William's voice was cold, slicing through the tension like a knife. "We need to talk." Michael took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. "There's nothing left to talk about, Dad," he said, his voice strong despite the fear gnawing at him. "You made your position clear, and I made mine." William's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the silence felt unbearable. "You think you know everything," he said, his tone laced with something dark and ominous. "But you don't." The storm they had feared was here, and it was only beginning. But he wouldn't let William intimidate them, not on this day. "What do you mean, Dad?" Michael demanded, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "What are you trying to say?" William took a few steps forward, his polished shoes echoing on the stone floor. The shadows seemed to grow darker around him, his presence a force that commanded attention. "You think this is about love," he said, his voice low and cutting. "You think you've escaped me, escaped this family, but you have no idea the mistake you're making." Michael clenched his jaw, anger simmering beneath the surface. "I'm not making a mistake," he shot back. "I'm choosing my own life, my own happiness, and there's nothing you can say or do to change that." William's gaze shifted to Emma, and she instinctively stepped closer to Michael, as if his love could shield her from the venom in his father's eyes. "This isn't just about you," William continued, his voice cold. "It's about her." He gestured toward Emma, his expression hardening. "She isn't who you think she is." Emma's face paled, her eyes widening in shock. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Michael felt his stomach drop. His grip on Emma's hand tightened protectively. "Don't you dare," he warned, his voice thick with fury. William's gaze remained fixed on Emma, and the church seemed to grow impossibly still. "Emma," he said, his tone almost eerily calm, "did your mother ever tell you the truth about your father?" Emma's breath caught in her throat, and she shook her head, her voice barely more than a whisper. "No, she never talked about him." A grim smile curved on William's lips. "That's because she was hiding something, a secret that changes everything," he said. "Emma, your father is me." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Michael's mind raced, trying to comprehend the words that had just shattered everything. He stared at his father, disbelief and horror crashing over him like a wave. "No," he breathed, his voice barely audible. That's not possible." Emma staggered back, her face ashen, her eyes wide with shock. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "It can't be true. You're lying." William's expression remained unyielding, devoid of any warmth or compassion. "I wish I were," he said. "Years ago, I had a relationship with your mother. When she became pregnant, I was young and ambitious. I paid her to stay quiet, to disappear and never speak of it. But she never told you the truth." The room felt suffocating, the weight of the revelation pressing down on everyone present. Emma's knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, her hands covering her face as the full horror of the situation washed over her. Michael dropped to his knees beside her, his own emotions a tangled mess of disbelief, rage, and heartbreak. The guests sat frozen in their seats, the joy of the wedding now twisted into a nightmare. Whispers of disbelief rippled through the room, but all Michael could focus on was Emma, her pain and confusion tearing at his heart. "Emma," he choked out, his voice thick with anguish. I don't know how this could be true." Emma's sobs were silent but powerful, her entire body shaking as she struggled to comprehend the twisted reality William had just revealed. "How could you?" she cried, looking up at William with eyes full of betrayal. "How could you do this?" William's expression didn't falter. He stood there, an unmoving pillar of authority and control. "Because I had no choice," he replied. "I did what I thought was necessary, and now you both have to live with the truth." Michael's heart shattered as he pulled Emma into his arms, holding her as tightly as he could, as if he could somehow protect her from the nightmare they had just stepped into. But he couldn't protect her from the past, from the monstrous truth that had just unraveled their lives. Emma clung to him, her sobs breaking through the silence of the church. The future they had dreamed of, the love they had fought so hard for, now lay in ruins. And Michael had no idea how they could ever put the pieces back together. The quiet in the church was oppressive, each person present gripped by the shock of William's revelation. Emma's sobs echoed in the stillness, her body trembling as she tried to process the unspeakable truth. Michael knelt beside her, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and rage. He had thought he knew the worst his father was capable of, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. He held Emma tightly, as if his embrace could shield her from the reality crashing down around them. Her hands clutched his suit, desperate for some sense of stability, but the world felt as though it had been ripped out from under her. Michael's heart ached at the sight of her pain, but he was just as lost, just as shattered. Finally, Emma pulled back slightly, her tear-streaked face lifting to meet his gaze. What do we do now?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The anguish in her eyes tore at Michael's soul, and he struggled to find words that would bring her comfort, but he had none. His throat was tight, his mind still reeling. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice raw. "I don't know how we move past this." William stood at the front of the church, watching them with a detached, almost clinical gaze. His presence loomed over them, a reminder of the power he still held, the devastation he had caused. But Michael wasn't ready to let him have the last word. He rose to his feet, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "Why?" he demanded, his voice shaking with fury. "Why did you do this now of all times? Why destroy everything we have just when we thought we were free?" William's jaw clenched, but he didn't look away. "Because you had to know," he said coldly. "You had to understand the consequences of your defiance. I couldn't let you go through with this marriage without knowing the truth." Michael's rage flared. "You didn't do this for me," he spat. "You did it to control me, to manipulate us one last time. You've ruined everything, and for what? To prove you still have power over me?" William's eyes narrowed. "You've always been too blinded by your emotions, Michael, too willing to throw away your future for a fleeting feeling. Love doesn't build empires. Love doesn't keep you safe when everything falls apart." Michael took a step closer, his voice rising. "Love is the only thing that's ever made me feel truly alive," he said, his anger mingled with heartbreak. "You'll never understand that, will you? Because all you care about is control." William's expression remained cold, unmoved. "I did what I had to do," he replied, his voice devoid of remorse. "You think love will protect you, but you'll learn the hard way. You always do." Michael's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay composed. He turned back to Emma, who had slowly risen to her feet. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from tears, but there was a spark of strength behind her pain. She wiped her cheeks, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "Emma," Michael said softly, his voice cracking. "We don't have to figure everything out right now, but I love you. I need you to know that hasn't changed." Emma's gaze met his, and her lip quivered. "I don't know how to feel, Michael," she whispered. This changes everything, but I don't want to lose you. Even after everything, I still love you." Michael's heart soared and broke in equal measure. They were standing on the edge of a chasm, their love caught in the crossfire of a truth they hadn't asked for. But he held on to the hope that they could find a way, no matter how painful the path ahead. William's voice interrupted their fragile moment. "You think you can fix this?" he sneered. "You think you can just pretend this never happened? You're fooling yourselves." Michael turned to face his father one last time, his eyes blazing with defiance. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice resolute. "We'll rebuild, even if it takes everything we have, and we'll do it without you." The air was thick with tension, but Michael no longer felt afraid. He had spent his life bowing to his father's will, but this time was different. He had chosen love, and he would fight for it no matter the cost. With Emma by his side, even in their brokenness, they turned away from William and walked out of the church. The storm was far from over, but together they were determined to find their way through it. The cold evening air hit Michael and Emma as they stepped out of the church, the world around them eerily quiet. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and deep blue. It felt fitting, as if the universe itself mourned the revelation that had torn them apart. Michael led Emma to the side of the church, away from the eyes of their stunned guests who had begun to file out, whispering among themselves. He turned to face her, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for hers. The anguish in her eyes shattered him, but he forced himself to speak. "Emma," he whispered, his voice cracking, "I don't have all the answers, but I can't lose you. Not now. Not ever." Emma looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears that she had fought so hard to hold back. "How do we even begin to move forward, Michael?" she asked, her voice small and broken. "How do we heal from something like this?" Michael's chest tightened, his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "I don't know," he admitted, his honesty raw. "But I know that I love you. That hasn't changed, and it never will. We have to believe that love can help us find a way." Emma pulled her hands away, crossing her arms over her chest as if to shield herself from the world. "It's not just about love, Michael," she said, her voice rising. "It's about trust, about the future we thought we had. It's all been ripped away." Michael took a step closer, desperate to bridge the chasm between them. "We can rebuild it," he pleaded. "We can make a new future, one that isn't defined by my father's lies. Please, Emma, don't give up on us." Emma's shoulders slumped, the weight of everything pressing down on her. Her heart was a storm of grief, anger, and love. Love for the man standing before her, who had fought so hard to be with her. The man who had been just as blindsided by this revelation as she had. "Michael," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I don't want to give up on us. But I'm scared. I'm scared that every time I look at you, I'll remember today. I'll remember the way the ground felt like it was falling out from under me." Michael's heart shattered all over again, but he refused to let go. He took her hands once more, his grip firm yet gentle. "I'm scared too," he confessed. "But we can't let him win. We can't let his darkness define our love. We've fought so hard to be together, and I'm willing to fight even harder to heal." Emma searched his eyes, looking for a glimmer of hope, a reason to believe that they could weather this storm. And there it was, the unwavering love she had always seen in him. A love that hadn't wavered even in the face of devastation. Her walls began to crack, and she felt the first flicker of hope reignite in her heart. Before she could respond, a voice broke through the tension. Jack, Michael's best friend, approached them, his face lined with worry. "Hey," he said cautiously, his gaze flicking between them. "Are you two okay?" Michael let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "No," he admitted, "but we're trying to be." Jack nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Listen," he said, his voice low. "The guests are starting to leave, but a few of us are staying to make sure your father doesn't try anything else. We've got your back." Michael felt a wave of gratitude toward his friend. "Thank you, Jack," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Jack gave a small, reassuring smile. "You're not alone, Michael. We'll get through this together." Emma looked at Jack, her heart softening at the sight of their friend standing by them. It was a reminder that they had a support system, people who loved them and wanted to see them happy. She took a shaky breath, then turned back to Michael, her hands finding his once more. "Okay," she said softly, her voice trembling but resolute. "We'll try. We'll find a way, one day at a time." Michael's eyes filled with relief, and he pulled her into a gentle embrace, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "We'll make it," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I promise." As the night deepened around them, Michael and Emma clung to each other, knowing that the path ahead would be anything but easy. But together, they had a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to prove that love could be stronger than even the deepest wounds. The days following the wedding felt like a delicate balancing act, each moment a struggle to find normalcy in the aftermath of the devastating revelation. Michael and Emma tried to move forward, clinging to the fragile hope that love could truly mend what had been shattered. They spent long hours talking, sometimes in tears, other times in silence, both knowing that healing would be a long journey. Michael had officially severed ties with his father's business, a decision that left him feeling both liberated and unmoored. The weight of the Harrison name no longer rested on his shoulders, and he was free to carve out his own path. Yet the future remained uncertain, a blank canvas filled with both fear and possibility. One crisp autumn afternoon, Michael and Emma found themselves walking along the Charles River. The air was cool, and the leaves painted the landscape in hues of red, orange, and gold. It felt almost peaceful, a brief respite from the storm they had endured. Michael glanced at Emma, her hair catching the golden light, and his heart swelled with love and determination. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently, his hand brushing against hers as they walked. Emma took a deep breath, her eyes reflecting a mixture of vulnerability and strength. "Better," she admitted, though her voice was tinged with lingering sadness. "It still hurts, but I'm starting to believe we can find our way through it." Michael's lips curved into a small, hopeful smile. "We can," he said. "I know we can, and whatever it takes, I'm here for you." They paused by the riverbank, and Emma turned to face him. Her eyes searched his, and she saw the unwavering love that had carried them through their darkest moments. "I don't know what our future looks like," she said softly, "but I do know I want it to be with you." Michael reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "We'll figure it out together," he promised, "one day at a time." A breeze rustled the leaves, and for a moment, the weight of the past seemed to lift, replaced by the quiet comfort of their shared resolve. They stood there in silence, letting the river's gentle flow wash over their wounded hearts, slowly beginning to heal. That evening, Michael and Emma returned to her small apartment, a space that had become their sanctuary. They made dinner together, the air filled with the warm aroma of spices and the soft hum of music playing in the background. It wasn't extravagant or luxurious, but it was perfect in its simplicity. After dinner, they sat on the couch, their fingers intertwined. Michael spoke about his plans for the future, dreams he had never allowed himself to have while living under his father's rule. He talked about starting a small business, something meaningful that would allow him to build a life based on his own values, rather than the expectations of the Harrison legacy. Emma, in turn, shared her passion for helping underprivileged women and the idea of creating a non-profit organization to make a difference in their lives. As they talked, the wounds of the past didn't feel quite as raw. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like something they could look forward to, rather than fear. "I'm proud of you," Emma said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "Walking away from your father's world took so much courage." Michael looked at her, his eyes soft and filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said. "You showed me what really matters. Love, kindness, and a life worth living." Tears welled in Emma's eyes, but this time they were tears of hope. She leaned forward, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that felt like a new beginning, a promise that they would face whatever came their way together. They had both learned the power of forgiveness, not only for each other but for themselves. The scars of their past remained, but they were no longer wounds that defined them. One afternoon, they found themselves back at the small church where their vows had nearly been torn apart. They stood hand in hand, the memory of that painful day lingering but no longer haunting them. Emma looked up at Michael, her heart full of love and gratitude. "It's strange being back here," she said softly, her voice steady. "But it feels different now, like we reclaimed it." Michael smiled, his fingers tightening around hers. "We have," he agreed. "This place isn't a symbol of what we lost anymore. It's a reminder of how far we've come." They stood there, the sun setting behind the church and casting a warm glow over the landscape. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a testament to the love that had survived despite everything. As they turned to leave, Michael pulled Emma close, his voice filled with a tenderness that left no room for doubt. "No matter what," he whispered, "I'm never letting go of you." Emma smiled, her eyes bright with tears and hope. "And I'm never letting go of you." Hand in hand, they walked into the future they had fought so hard to build, knowing that love had indeed prevailed. Michael and Emma's journey was anything but easy, because true love never is. They faced betrayal, lies, and a devastating secret that nearly tore them apart. Now, with the future finally in their hands, the question remains: do you believe love can truly conquer all? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know what you think. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales that touch your heart and inspire. Sometimes love is the greatest act of courage there is.